You wanted it and you got it. She sat on a bar stool, sipping a vodka and coke, and waited. She glanced at her watch and noted that her friend was already 15 minutes late. Thoughts flashed through her mind about the wisdom of this prank. The wait was adding to her nervousness and misgivings. Carrie looked around the bar. It was an ordinary lounge bar. In an ordinary hotel, a few customers sat there listening to the tinkling of a piano in the background of their chatter. She sat alone at the end of the bar, trying to remain unremarkable. The stares of a couple of customers made her nervous. They were looking at her as if they were predators, perhaps seeing her as an easy target. She was an easy target, a lone vulnerable woman, or perhaps a call girl. The way she was dressed and the fact that she was alone in the hotel bar made the predator think. Where was she? She glanced at her watch again. Now 20 minutes late. She sipped her second shot of vodka and coke. The warmth of the cool liquid warmed her throat as she looked around the bar. She caught the eye of a man sitting facing her at one of the tables. He raised his glass and smiled. She blushed and averted her eyes, but she could feel him watching her. She tried not to look away, enjoying the attention but not wanting to attract or encourage it. Her phone beeped twice. It was a text message from Mage. She rummaged through her purse and pulled out a smartphone. She took her phone out of her purse and a few flicks of her fingers and the text filled the screen. It was short and sweet, which was strange for Grace. She usually liked to write long messages filled with gory details if she couldn't call and talk. She looked at the text message. Her shoulders slumped. All that trouble she'd spent organizing this evening was now a waste of time. She dialed Grace's number. She waited and the beep sounded in her ear, but it sounded unanswered for a few seconds, then it cut off. She tried again and got the usual message that the number could not be connected. She left a message for her friend, "Call me. Why is it so important to mess things up now? Call me." Carrie tossed the phone back into her bag. She stared down at her drink, her thoughts racing as she tried to think through her next move. Grace was with her every time she ventured outside of her marriage. In fact, she was the one who had encouraged her along the way. This was the first time. It was the first time in almost 2 years that she hadn't shown up. What on earth was so important that it couldn't wait until tomorrow? She felt angry and frustrated. She hadn't had love for a week or more, or had it been longer? She tried to remember. Well, maybe it had been longer because she couldn't remember being with Gary, but that didn't matter, did it? Carrie was 33 years old and had already been married for 8 years to Pete, who was 2 years older. They met at a mutual friend's party one Christmas and hit it off. They dated for a little over a year before realizing it was serious. A year later, they were married. Their careers were just starting to blossom, so they decided to leave, starting a family for a few years. Maybe that was the decision that had brought Carrie to this situation. She took a sip of her vodka and noticed the man was still glancing her way. This time she smiled back at him, just a fleeting smile, but enough for him to see she knew how to play this game. She wondered how long it would be before he approached her. She licked her lips. Her lips slowly moved as she knew he was watching her. A vicious thought flashed through her mind, making her heart beat a little faster and a tingling started deep inside her. Her friend Grace was left out of the picture for the time being as she set off in pursuit of the unknown guy. She sipped her drink, thinking again about how she had gotten here. Her husband Pete was away for a couple of days for work. He was a safety consultant and had been brought in to work on risk assessments for work on specialized work sites such as substations and railway lines. He traveled regularly around the UK and also made occasional trips to Europe. It was these trips that gave Carrie the opportunity to lose her way. Her friend Grace was all too eager to have Grace was caught in her own bed with 2 men when her husband sent an investigator to deal with the cheating wife and her lovers. Grace was shocked and surprised, but she wasn't sorry. When it was revealed that he had been watching her for weeks, she realized there was no point. She was trying to defend something for which there was no excuse, but her divorce went off without any fireworks. It did, however, have an impact on her ability to maintain her connections. Carrie supported her and, as a friend, felt it was right to offer her that support after the initial shock and aftermath of her divorce. The two friends they started meeting for dinner from time to time. Since Pete was away, there was no need to come home early. They had fun together, acting like single women. Grace encouraged Carrie to let her hair down and have a little fun. They first met at a club. They used to go out pretty regularly. There were a couple of guys who liked to hide drinks on them. One time, there were drinks pouring down by the river. There was a lot of flirting and dancing with lots of body contact. Carrie noticed that Grace was really into it when the guy she was with covered her lips with his. After that, it was all a blur until she realized they were in a hotel room naked. It was almost 3 a.m. midnight. She shook her head, bringing herself out of her reverie. The thoughts she had then were confusing, erotic and mixed with shame, excitement and betrayal. It had taken some time to come to her senses after that first time, almost 3 months, in fact. But then it happened again and again. It was now commonplace for the two women to go on the hunt for men. The earlier thoughts of her husband had been replaced in her nightly walks by pure lust. No thoughts of betrayal were now allowed into her mind. She sought only the lust that strangers could provide. It was supposed to be another fun night, and now her friend had backed out at the last minute. What a disappointment! She tried to remember how long it had been since she'd last had an affair with Pete. Surely it had only been a couple of weeks ago, but she couldn't remember. She'd been seeing Grace a lot lately, since Pete had been on a few trips, so she'd been with other men. But with Pete, something was keeping her on the back of her mind. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it was there. She finished. She put her drink down on the mat by the bar. The bartender looked at her. She nodded and he turned to pour her another. "I'll pay for it if that's okay," his deep voice boomed right behind her. She turned around and saw a man. He was about 5 feet 10 inches, had short hair the color of salt and pepper and looked slim and trim. Confident with deep brown eyes, Carrie felt drawn to this man's intense gaze as if he was already with her. She felt a shiver of pleasure and realized that he was the one she wanted tonight. She felt aroused. And she felt it. He noticed it too. "Put it on my tab," the bartender said, and stepped back. He'd seen it all before, a single married woman and a seasoned catcher preparing for seduction. It made him cringe, but he thought, sometimes women get what they deserve. This girl looked like a player herself, which in his eyes made the situation even worse. There was some poor guy at home or somewhere else who thought she was out with a friend or sitting at home pining for him. Yes, it disgusted him that people could betray so easily. It was clear that the man was making his move. His signs of attention were well received. He turned away, wiping his glass, and watched the scene unfold. The next hour passed in the usual chase routine. The bartender watched the couple play out their roles. The stalker flirted and pushed her buttons, and she flirted back, laughing at his clever speeches and gifting him with her smile and something else. They slowly enveloped each other. Carrie completely forgot about Grace as her admirer teased and flattered her. The heat was building up. She was feeling pretty good inside, and she really needed it. She thought back to the last guy. When was that? Oh, yes, it had been that young guy at the Hilton. Grace had introduced them to the two guys on a sales trip. Yeah, it was a fun night. It occurred to her that she remembered her nights with strangers and not Pete. That had been weird. She was brought back to the present when her admirer put his hand on her knee. He gently stroked her knee as they chatted. She wasn't sure how long he'd been doing it, but it still felt good. The bender watched the man. He was gradually winning her trust. He could see it, and he knew there was only one way it could end. They all knew it too. After another round of vodka and coke, Carrie was tipsy enough to relax with her chosen one. She slid off the stool and melted into his arms. He gave her a big hug and planted a friendly but firm kiss on her lips. The bartender watched as she kissed him back. He knew it was his turn. The man gave the bartender a wave as he put his glass on the bar mat and left a tip under it. He picked up their glasses and put the tip in his pocket with a quick movement. He watched the couple head toward the lobby, smiling grimly. The kissing had begun in earnest in the elevator on the way to his suite. Now his hands were gently but insistently caressing Carrie's buttocks and breasts. He was in control of the situation. The chase was almost over. He had her now. Carrie gasped as his lips covered hers, seeking her tongue and releasing the lust inside her. They staggered to his room, kissing each other and giggling as they almost tumbled out the door. Clothes were shed as they approached the large bed, their lips locked together and soon they were naked. Then they made passionate love at about 2 a.m. They started to cool down a bit. "I'll call you a cab if you want. If you need to be somewhere," he smiled at her. "Thanks, that would be nice, but I need a shower first." "You go on ahead. I'll make the call." Taking a shower, she soaked herself from head to toe and basked in the warm water. Her thoughts slowly tasted. She wondered what had happened to Grace. Everything was fine, though she was still having fun tonight. Then she realized there had been no call from Pete. Maybe she had missed it, but that was unusual, he always called. She wiped herself down with a big fluffy towel and She got dressed again and put her makeup on. She checked her phone but there were no missed calls from Pete. She kissed her lover and left the room, heading down the hall to the elevators. She had a feeling something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She pressed the elevator call button and waited in the quiet hallway. Her thoughts were all over the place. Her body was still buzzing from a great night of lovemaking, but her mind was racing. She flinched when she heard the bell announcing the arrival of the elevator. She stepped inside and watched the floor numbers. She went down to the first floor, walked through the lobby, and was greeted by the receptionist, who smiled as if they knew who she was. Carrie returned the smile, thinking it wasn't the first time she'd been mistaken for a woman of easy virtue leaving a customer at this time of night. She got into a black cab on the curb. As she was driven home, she watched the lights of the city go by. She thought that Pete wouldn't be back for another 2 days, so she still had plenty of time to spend alone. Unless Grace showed up, she'd sent her a text. She'd spent a great night with a real stud. "Sorry you missed it. Call me in the morning." Kay leaning back in her chair, she thought about what had happened the night before. She had his calling card, so she could call him if she wanted. The cab pulled up outside her house. It was dark, except for the security lights. She paid the driver and walked slowly to her door. She threw her bag on the floor and stepped inside. She kicked off her heeled shoes and headed for bed. Carrie felt the pounding in her head intensify, which never stopped. It seemed to go on seemingly continuously and insistent. She tentatively opened her eyes and looked at the clock next to her bed. The noise was coming from behind her front door. It was 8, it was 00 in the morning and Carrie was struggling to get out of bed. She threw on her robe and headed towards the source of the noise. As she approached the door, she heard a voice say, "I'm here." "Grace, open up," she said. Okay, I'm coming. Anyway, what happened to you last night?" Carrie turned around to fill the coffee maker. Grace grabbed Carrie by the shoulders, turning her around and looked into her eyes. "Carrie, he knows. He knows Pete, he knows everything. I don't know how, but he found out and he's the reason I couldn't go last night." Again, something was wrong. Grace mumbled something to Carrie, but Carrie wasn't listening. Grace shook her awake. "But he does. He showed me some of it on his phone. Oh my God, no. No, no, no. It's a nightmare. He can't. He just can't." The realization of this was already starting to creep into Carrie's mind when there was a knock on the door. Grace headed for the door and returned with a grim expression on her face. "It's for you." She plopped into a chair at the kitchen table. Carrie looked up and saw a middle-aged man stepped forward and asked Grace if she was Carrie Franks. She replied in a shaky voice that she was. He handed her a large envelope and said, "Thank you, ma'am. You have been served." He then turned and headed straight for the door. Grace ripped open the envelope, causing its contents to spill across the table. There were a few photos and a couple of CDs. Carrie shuddered at the evidence of her infidelity. There was also a letter from Pete. She looked at his handwriting on the envelope and, trembling, slowly opened it. Carrie, now you know that I know everything and really mean everything. A while back I found out what you and your friend were up to. One of the guys you two he met, had sex with, and took pictures of two girls. He was impressed and took pictures. That was the start. You know how long it lasted. As soon as I found out, I stopped having sex with you. Did you even notice? Don't worry, cheater. You're about to get hurt. I sold the house first, so you have to leave. Maybe a few weeks to get out of here. No, I don't care about the courts or anybody else. If you want your share, you should have found it first. There's nothing left in the bank. I took it all. Do I care? No, you wanted it and you got it. I've emailed a compilation of your most photogenic photos to everyone we know. The send button is due at 9:14 a.m. morning, there's no stopping it. Everyone at work will know about it by 9:01. I'm sure you had fun with your girlfriend. Well, now you may have to get really professional about it. I loved you once, but ever since I found out you've killed every feeling I ever had for you, but I'll survive. I'm leaving, so good luck tracking me down. By the time you do, I'm sure there won't be anything left to fight. I've taken what I need, the rest is yours. Grace watched as her friend slowly settled to the kitchen floor, and the life just flowed out of her like air from a deflating balloon.